as well as preparing for the BEAD dollars, broadband equity access and deployment dollars at the state level with the federal government partnership, as well as our digital opportunity work. As you can see on the slide, our work does encourage, foster, develop, and improve broadband across the state. So we are targeting to create good jobs, promote innovation, expand markets across the state. We also understand the growing needs of our healthcare systems, education, public safeties, and other industries across the state. And ultimately, our goal is to get unserved and underserved communities and populations served through broadband access. Just a couple of updates I want to share with all of you. Many of you are aware, a few weeks ago, we did celebrate our 10-year anniversary of the Office of Broadband Development and made awards of $53 million in border-to-border and low population grants. So we know this work is really going to be important moving forward with deploying those grant dollars. Additionally, we do have another round open right now of $50 million. And that will close on May 10th at 1:30 p.m. So just note that that is not an end of the day closing application process, but at 1:30. More information on that is on our website with all of the deadlines and targeted dates moving forward with that grant round. We want to really thank you all for your participation in those programs, working with our providers across the state if you are a consultant, as well as other units of government interested in this work. As we know, BEAD is coming along the tailwinds, and we're busy planning, doing our volume 1 and 2. The challenge process will open up here in Minnesota for the location challenges once our volume 1 is approved. We do believe we still have a couple iterations of going back and negotiating with NTIA on how that will look, but are hopeful we will continue to move forward. Also, last week, our digital opportunity plan was approved by NTIA, and now we are busy working on our notice of funding application for digital capacity grants to be able to deploy and do the work that was identified within that digital opportunity plan that Minnesota needs. So with that, those are some of the updates, but really also want to just thank, again, our partner agencies across the state of Minnesota who came together with us so that we could put on a meaningful training series for all of you, provide some best management practices, and really foster a relationship of working together here at the state to deploy broadband. So with that, our first agency to join us is the Minnesota Department of Transportation, or MnDOT. Ann Driver is the Utility Permit Unit Supervisor, and Jamie Ladwig is the Cultural Resource Unit Archaeologist. So we are going to turn it over to them to give a presentation, and then once they are complete, we will be taking questions and answers at that time. So please hold till the end. Members of my team, Anna and Megan, are on, as well as other members of the team here too. So we're all hearing the same presentation. This is also being recorded, and we will make sure to get this up on our website as soon as we are able as well, so this can serve as a resource. So with that, Ann and Jamie, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name's Ann Driver, and I'm with MnDOT. I just want to check, are you seeing my screen? Okay, great. I am in the Office of Land Management and am the Utility Permits Unit Supervisor. Been in that role for, almost 15 years now, I suppose. I was looking through the guest list a minute ago, and I saw quite a few names I recognized from working with, so that's good. Glad to see people joining in. So I'm going to start off talking about utility permits, and about halfway through I'm going to switch it over, and Jamie's going to take control. She's from the Office of Environmental Stewardship, Cultural Resources Unit, so we'll have information on that as well. All right, so to get started, I'm going to talk about a few things today in the process. A brief history of MnDOT, the statutes, rules, and policies, and manual that govern the permitting, the process for applicants, the process for MnDOT, and our goals moving forward. So let's begin back in 1858 when Minnesota achieved statehood. At that time, the legislature began passing laws directing townships and counties in road and bridge building matters. But it wasn't until 1898 when a constitutional amendment passed that allowed the state to participate directly in road development. However, the state did not begin building roads and bridges until after the State Highway Commission was created in 1905. And then in 1912, the road and bridge section of the state constitution was amended. Oh, and that's when the first road taxes were levied, and shortly after that, the gas taxes started. In 1917, the Highway Commission was abolished and the Department of Highways was created. And then in 1920, a constitutional amendment allowed for the creation of a system of 70 trunk highways. That led to 1921 legislation that mandated for the department to acquire right-of-way, locate, construct, improve, and maintain trunk highways, to let necessary contracts, and to buy needed materials and equipment and expend necessary funds. An order was then legislated for the regulation of public utilities on trunk highway right-of-way. And so MnDOT's been permitting utilities on trunk highway right-of-way since 1921. We go back quite a ways. From the 1920s to 1976, several commissions and departments were created, merged, legislated. The Railroad and Warehouse Commission, Aeronautics, Public Service, Public Safety, Highway Patrol, Driver's License Bureau. 1959, however, brought the revisions of the 1921 order by way of the laws of 1959, Chapter 500, Article 2, Section 45. This became our current statute, 16145, and that led to the creation of the rules 8810-3100 to 8810-3600, all of which these govern utility permitting, almost through the history and up to current year. In 1976, the Minnesota Department of Transportation was created and assumed the activities of the Departments of Aeronautics and Highways, plus transportation-related sections of the State Planning Agency, the Public Service Department. The legislature then determined that MnDOT would be the principal agency to develop, implement, administer, consolidate, coordinate state transportation policies, plans, and programs. So in a very small nutshell, that's the history of how MnDOT and utility permits evolved through the years to our present-day practices. So taking a look at the statutes that have the most impact on our utility permitting, 16145. Last year brought some changes to this statute. The changes revolved around power generation and transmission line use of trunk highway right-of-way. However, you note that the Commissioner still retains the authority to prescribe and enforce reasonable rules. And then 22237, public road use. There's been laws and statutes since 1905 about public road use and restrictions that have led up to the current statute. This statute has also seen changes in the last year regarding transmission line use of highways. However, note that the governing body retains the right to impose reasonable rules. So then the rules that really affect permitting, 8810-3100 to 8810-3600. These were created to carry out the mandate of the statute of 161.45. 8810-3300 provides that a permit is required to be granted before any construction begins, and that a work permit is required before any service or maintenance work is performed. For construction activities, that permit is a utility accommodation permit, and for maintenance, that is a miscellaneous work permit. So moving on to our policy, guidance, and manual. Up this up over here, and just jump to our website with our policy and manual. I'm hoping everyone can see that. Well, the utility accommodation policy prescribes practices and procedures to regulate and accommodate utility facilities along, across, or on the right-of-way of all trunk highways and other transportation facilities under the jurisdiction of the Minnesota Commissioner of Transportation. The policy applies to all public and private utilities. It covers all existing utility facilities retained, relocated, replaced, or altered, and new utility facilities installed on MnDOT right-of-way. The Code of Federal Regulations requires each state transportation department to submit to its Federal Highway Administration Division Administrator a statement of the authority of utilities to use and occupy the right-of-way of federal aid highways, the authority of the state to regulate such use, and the policies that state employs, and the policies the state employs or proposes to employ for accommodating utilities within the right-of-way of any highway project receiving federal aid. And the manual provides the procedures used by MnDOT to accommodate utilities within trunk highway right-of-way. And that brings us to the process that we go through for utility permitting. It begins with the applicants using our online permit application system. And I'll pop up that screen here. And so this would be the opening screen of our online permitting system. First, need to determine the type of permit needed. Utility permits are used to place and construct and reconstruct utilities. Miscellaneous work permits are for minor work that includes installation of utility service connections, maintenance of utility service connections, maintenance of utility facilities, and maybe installation of guy wires or temporary placements. So obviously, new installation, you would go with the utility accommodation permit. If you create an account, you can have all of this basic information saved to you when you come back in and keep entering permits. Let's see. So if you come in as a guest user, you fill this in every time. Again, if you're creating an account, this would automatically be filled in for you. The application is pretty basic, tribal lands. If you're in tribal lands, we need to get tribal approval for the permit. We request that you get that before you apply. We ask that the location of work and the type of utility be explained in this section. If you're maybe you're going on some power poles, so you'd be aerial. You would need to fill out this part of the application and the communication part of the application. Not too difficult. Everything's pretty self-explanatory. If you're a buried communication cable, you fill out the buried part and the communication part. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Jump through the documents there. We ask that if you are deed funded or broadband funded or border to border funded, and we even have seen some different federal funding come in, put that in this comments area so that we catch that and we know that it is broadband funding of one sort or another. Then we ask that you attach mapping. So you can attach up to 3 files and up to 70 megabits of information. Select the district that you're working in. If you're not sure, there's a map you can click onto, and then check the box and hit the submit button. And that's pretty much it for the application part of it. Let me just see here. A couple of special conditions that I would like to call account to. Here's again the tribal boundaries. You must receive tribal approval before applying for the permit. If it doesn't come in with the application, it will likely be rejected because we know it can take a while to work through that process with the different tribes. We do have contacts if you need contact information for some of the tribal contacts. please reach out for that. And again, just the comment in the comment field that is broadband funded, that would help us out a great deal. So our review process, we look at lots of different things. Is the application complete? Were all those fields filled out? Is the mapping readable? And for mapping, let's see. Our right-of-way mapping and monitoring site is the place to go to get mapping, and what we require is the right-of-way mapping. There's some tips and contacts and information there, and then you can just jump right into the right-of-way mapping site. And we ask that you use right-of-way maps so it can be related back to where we are in MnDOT world. Just sort of picking a spot here and give you a quick example. I'm going to jump up here and turn some aerial photography on. Then there's lots of layers you can pick from. Control sections, bridges, streets, highways, counties, tribal boundaries, MnDOT districts, municipalities, those, and civil townships. Those are the ones that get used most often. And so then we can go find where we're at in the real world out here and just pick a spot to get to your map. That tells you what the map number is, and you can open it up. I hope you're still seeing everything I'm seeing. So we have a right-of-way map. And what we ask for that you show on the right-of-way maps is, let's say, the location of where your facility needs to go. So I encourage people to get something similar to Adobe or something that works with PDF maps. It can be that simple. Draw a line on there. Maybe there's another fiber line that goes through here, so we need to show that. And, maybe there's a power pole line that runs all along here as well. And we can edit these and make it real easy to see differences. And in a nutshell, that's what we're looking for, is show me where you're going to be, show me other utilities that are in the area, and click this map and send it in. Of course, you can always reach out to me or somebody in my staff for questions with that. But that's the kind of mapping we're looking for. We look to make sure it's readable and accurate. Does it match up with the written description that you filled in on the application? Sometimes we can get off, 6 miles if you're in the wrong or a different township or section. So we check that. Is it in a location that we would be able to permit it? It's not paralleling within a freeway design section, or it's not in a corridor that has been deemed full and there's just no possible way you could get in there. And does it have any other special requirements? Does it have an area of slope failure where you can't go in and you'd have to cross to the other side of the road? Things like that. Again, we look to see if it's in tribal lands. Does the mapping show where the other utilities are? We request that other utilities be shown so that the applicant and MnDOT can be fairly certain there's room for the installation at the desired location. It avoids a lot of out in the field guesswork and moving around for our inspectors and for your contractors. Is the installation method typically, is the method of installation correct for the circumstances? Typically with communication cable, we see directional bores or plowing in. Some aerial overlashing or aerial attachments are common as well. For more information, I found this to be a good resource. The North American Society for Trenchless Technology has a lot of these graphics and different explanations for different ways of installation. We also look to see if it's in a MnDOT project area. Will it be in the way if your construction crews are out there when our crews are going to be out there? If we issue a permit now and 2 years from now there's a project, will your installation get will it have to get moved right away? So we try and check, a couple of years into the future and make sure that if you do install it today, it's not going to have to get moved 2 years from now. If it's for a project, you have to work with the project manager. If it's for a MnDOT project, if it's a relocation, you need to work with the project manager as well to make sure that it is going to be located where there isn't going to be any future issues. We also look to have other offices review it. If your proposed work is within 50 feet of bridges or structures, and that could be retaining walls, noise walls, mechanically stabilized earth walls, big drainage structures, any type of infrastructure that we might have out there needs to get reviewed if it's within 50 feet of that structure. Roadside vegetation management often needs to review these. It could be because there's an area of weeds out there that we don't want to get trailed further up and down the road. It could be there's a rare plant out there, or it could be there's prairie land out there that we're trying to preserve. There's all sorts of vegetation reasons that they would need to look at that. Cultural resources, is it in a culturally sensitive area? And this is more of what Jamie will talk about in a little bit here. Contaminated materials, do we know if there's a spill out there? Maybe there was a gas station there and the tanks leaked 50 years ago. Is there land or dirt that's going to have to be taken off site to be taken care of? We look at threatened and endangered species. Right now there's a lot about bats and their roosting habits and tree trimming times and that butterflies, things come on the list for threatened and endangered, and that group has different requirements as well. Again, if it's in construction area or maybe a hydraulics area, all of those groups may need to get a chance to look at that. So then we are still talking about MnDOT's review here. Will it cause a maintenance issue for MnDOT or the applicant? Is it aerial? Is there safe clearance for maintenance and possible construction activities? If the utility has maintenance work to perform, will it cause safety issues for their workers or the traveling public? After we review all of these, we decide if it is acceptable or not. If accepted, we route it to the indicated offices for their review, comments, and requirements. If they have any, after all the required reviews are complete, we write the permit and send it out for final approvals. The permit is issued to the applicant when we get it back with all the signatures on it. And again, in a nutshell, that's kind of the process that the applicants go through and that we go through as MnDOT reviewing proposed work within our right-of-way. So goals and best practices. We really strive for a 4-week turnaround from acceptance of a permit to when we issue it. We understand that these grant-funded applications have some funding requirements, kind of a use it or lose it thing for 2 years, so they have been given a higher priority and will get pulled closer to the top of the pile for working on. The 4-week turnaround that we look at, we start that clock when we received all the required information. So if when we're looking at it after we have accepted it and we find that we need more information, or one of the other offices might need more information to continue their review, we will get back in touch with the applicant and request that information. And then if some of the other offices have extended reviews, like Jamie will talk about, we would reach out to the applicants and ask, do you want to continue with this route, or maybe you'd like to reroute it, because the review could take 2, 3, 4, 5 months sometimes, especially when you're talking about cultural resources reviews. So we give you that option, and there have been a few that have chosen to find a different way to get to where they need. If you just absolutely have to go through that route, then it does have to go through the functional group reviews. And so we do strive to accommodate utility facilities whenever possible. However, we must remember the permitted use and occupancy of highway rights-of-way by utilities is subordinate to the primary interest and safety of the traveling public. In 2023, we issued over 1,400 utility permits, and we only denied 1. So we do our best to work with you to get your facility where it needs to go, and try and do it in a very timely manner and make everyone happy at the same time. And we appreciate that you work with us, and we try and do our best to accept your applications and get them out the door as quickly as we can. And with that, I understand we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation here. But if at any other time you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me or one of the permit writers. You can find our contacts here at this link. And thank you for listening in today. Much appreciated. And I'll take any questions you have at the end. And now let me pass it over to Jamie Ladwig with MnDOT's Cultural Resources Unit. Thank you, everyone.
Great. And hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Yep.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much. And hopefully you can see a screen that I'm sharing as well.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for confirming. Excellent. Well, as Ann mentioned, I am Jamie Ladwig. I'm with MnDOT's Cultural Resources Unit. So MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit is housed within the Office of Environmental Stewardship. And as Ann had mentioned, in addition to permit applications potentially getting routed to the Cultural Resources Unit for review, they also get routed to other functional groups within MnDOT, including roadside vegetation management, contaminated and regulated materials, threatened and endangered species, in addition to Cultural Resources Unit. So just a bit of an overview of CRU within MnDOT. So MnDOT's Cultural Resources Unit is part of the Office of Environmental Stewardship, and that's located in MnDOT's Central Office. Currently, MnDOT CRU has 7 archaeologists, one of which is shared with our Tribal Affairs Office, and 6 historians. So MnDOT CRU is tasked with reviewing proposed projects under federal and state laws as applicable. So MnDOT CRU reviews under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, where there is federal involvement, and under applicable state statutes when it's a MnDOT proposed project or in the case of permitting. So MnDOT reviews under applicable state statutes, including the Minnesota Historic Sites Act, Field Archaeology Act, Private Cemeteries Act. Also, we do consult with tribes and coordinate with tribes on a project-by-project basis as needed. So our review responsibilities include conducting Section 106 reviews on behalf of federal agencies, so on behalf of the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Authority, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and other federal agencies as delegated to MnDOT. And this is primarily for projects such as those locally led projects that are receiving federal funding from the Federal Highway Administration through the State Aid for Local Transportation Program or the Federal Recreational Trail Program. But our staff also conduct state statute reviews on behalf of MnDOT, including deference to the Historic Sites Act, Field Archaeology Act, and Private Cemeteries Act. So this applies to MnDOT proposed projects and lead projects along with right-of-way permits. So why is a CRU review needed? For quite a few reasons. So MnDOT state statute requires that MnDOT be stewards of cultural resources on lands that it controls. So we're not just a transportation agency, we're a transportation agency that is required to protect resources that matter to the public. So per the Historic Sites Act, and that's Minnesota Statute 138.661 through .669, this statute directs project proposers, including MnDOT, to consult with the Minnesota State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO is the acronym, if projects will impact National Register of Historic Places listed or state listed properties. The Field Archaeology Act, Minnesota Statute 138.40, directs non-federal public landowners, including MnDOT, to request recommendations for site preservation on a project-by-project basis from SHPO, from the Office of the State Archaeologist, OSA, and then Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, MIAC, when projects are in areas known or predicted to have significant archaeological sites. The Minnesota Private Cemeteries Act, and this is Minnesota Statute 307.08, directs landowners, including MnDOT, to request recommendations for the preservation of human burials on a project-by-project basis from the OSA and or from MIAC when projects are within areas known or suspected to have human remains. And then another very important state statute is the government-to-government relationships with tribal governments. This is Minnesota Statute 1065, and this directs state agencies, including MnDOT, to consult with Minnesota tribal governments on matters that may be important to those governments. So CRU review is important, but it's not just MnDOT's responsibility, it's also the utility's responsibility. MnDOT, as the landowner and as being obligated to meet its state statute obligations, needs to work really closely with utility proposers to ensure that cultural resource regulations are being met and that conditions that are determined to be required are being followed in the course of construction. Very important to state that under the Minnesota Private Cemeteries Act, so again, this is Minnesota Statute 307.08, any person who intentionally, willfully, or knowingly destroys, mutilates, or injures human burials or disturbs or removes human remains without consent from the appropriate authority is guilty of a felony. So the discovery of an archaeological site or human remains during project construction can be costly in terms of unintentional damage to sensitive cultural resources, along with taking a lot of time, costing a lot of money, and really damaging relationships. So what does CRU review? CRU reviews permits when a portion of the permit area, proposed project, is within 500 feet of a historically sensitive area. So these historically sensitive areas are areas of known sites and or predicted site locations and or mortuary concerns. So CRU reviews the project within MnDOT right-of-way associated with the permit application to determine if there is potential to contain additional unidentified sites or burials and or to determine if there may be potential impacts to recorded site locations. Important to understand that sites and human remains may be located where there are current utilities and some roads because the laws just weren't in place when utilities were initially put in and or roads were constructed to really screen for these archaeological and cultural resource concerns. So roads and utilities sometimes have been constructed through archaeological sites, cemeteries, or burial mounds historically. So just again to recap, in terms of those state statute obligations, MnDOT at the end of the day is not the regulator when it comes to cultural resources. We, like any other non-federal public land owner in the state of Minnesota, have to ensure compliance with Minnesota state statutes. So in the case of the state statutes that we've been discussing, in regard to the Historic Sites Act, it's the responsibility of the entity doing, funding, or licensing the work to meet the conditions of that particular state statute, or the agency controlling the lands that may be affected by the proposed work for the Minnesota Field Archaeology Act and the Private Cemeteries Act. So important to continue to reiterate that MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit can only review permits within its statutory responsibilities. And it's important as well to understand that only about 30% of MnDOT right-of-way has been surveyed for cultural resources, which means that there is quite a bit of unknowns. And some of those surveys were done quite some time ago, so they don't necessarily meet current standards for survey work. So in terms of procedures, after MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit receives an email notification from OES permit staff, we determine if we have all of the information that we need included with that permit application. So as Anne was pointing out, there are all of those data points that are requested as part of that permit application process initially, but when those permit reviews get routed to CRU, a lot of times we need additional information above and beyond what's included in that initial application. So I'm just going to go through some commonly requested additional data points to assist MnDOT CRU in its review for permit applications. So GIS shapefiles, or KMZs, so these are the Google Earth, essentially geodata of proposed ground disturbance areas, including staging and laydown areas within MnDOT right-of-way, are really helpful to have. Proposed ground disturbance limits descriptions, so horizontal and vertical limits, including the depth of installation. That particular depth of installation is a data point that I typically see missing in permit applications. Information of existing utilities, along with method of installation and date installed if known. Any additional information related to currently proposed or prior ground disturbance within or adjacent to the permit area that the applicant can supply. In the case of deed projects, B2B projects, other broadband initiative projects, if there has been archaeology or cultural resource investigations completed ahead of these permit applications, submitting that information to CRU really helps with our review. So if there's been that coordination with pertinent state agencies or other parties, so SHPO, OSA, MIAC, tribes, as part of the environmental review process to date, that information is incredibly helpful to our unit when we review permit applications. Just a few more examples of the detailed type of information that may be requested from you if one of your permits gets routed to Cultural Resources Unit for review. If handholds, pedestals, doghouse installation is proposed, information on the proposed locations and dimensions, so length, width, depth of that total ground disturbance area that's anticipated to be subjected to ground disturbance. If potholing is proposed, information on proposed potholing locations and methods, so hydrovac, hand digging, directional boring, again, information on proposed depths, along with the potential locations of those boring entry and exit pit locations, including the XYZ data, so that length, width, and depth. Aerial utility work or utility pole adjustments. If existing utility poles are to be removed or replaced, information on the methods of removal and the installation locations of replacement poles, including anchors, are data points that we would need to conduct our review. If open trenching is proposed, again, information on proposed locations and dimensions of those trenches and the type of equipment to be used. So the main idea is CRU needs to have specific information on anticipated ground disturbance limits associated with utility projects in order to complete our review and ensure that we're meeting our state standards, state statute obligations. So just an overview of data points that CRU staff look to and a little bit more about the process once permits are received. So CRU staff review of the project, the nature of the work, proposed methods of construction. We review state data points, including the Office of the State Archaeologist portal, to screen for previously recorded resources, glean the information that is currently recorded in state files. We look at MnDOT right-of-way mapping, historic and current plat maps, historic and current aerial imagery or roadside imagery, LiDAR imagery. We look at soil map data to try to help inform us of the potential presence for, say, buried sites. We look at previous MnDOT construction plans and roadway construction logs, historic and current plat maps, numerous resources. So essentially, CRU is completing a phase 1A at the intake level as permits come in so that we can determine what those next steps might need to be. So within 10 business days of receipt of the application and receiving all of that additional requested information, CRU provides written documentation to permit staff, including indicating the results of CRU's review, which might include, stipulating areas of avoidance, either horizontally or vertically. We may state that archaeological survey is needed, construction monitoring is needed, and we may indicate that we determined that consultation and or review requests or requests for information are required to those regulators. We may need to send a request for recommendations to OSA or MIAC, consultation with Minnesota tribal nations, consultation with SHPO. If a proposed permit is determined to require consultation, CRU then contacts the permit applicant to confirm that they want to proceed with that proposed work, and then CRU initiates that consultation to applicable parties. So just an overview on that consultation process. So CRU puts together the consultation request. So that's including the information that was contained in that original permit application, along with that additional data that was submitted by permit applicants. And that gets included into the consultation requests, requests for recommendations, or requests for information letters that are sent to OSA, MIAC, SHPO, tribes, other entities as determined necessary. And the permit applicant is notified when the materials are sent. Important to state that even if the applicant and others may have consulted with these same entities, MnDOT is still required to consult with these entities per its current directives to follow state statute compliance and conduct its own coordination and consultation. So in terms of review times for consulting parties, it's a 30-day review period per state statute pursuant to the Field Archaeology Act and MnDOT's agreements with some tribal historic preservation officers, or a 45-day review period in the case of those potential projects tied to the Minnesota Private Cemeteries Act and MnDOT's agreements with some tribal historic preservation officers. It's important to note that there may be additional consultation periods that are associated with permit applications, just dependent on the complexity of the resources involved, comments received by those consulting parties, if we get information on project modifications, etc. If cultural resource investigations are determined to be required, those are carried out by the applicant's consultant following that submission of consultation requests or request for recommendation submission by cultural resources unit. If archaeological investigations, including survey, evaluation, data recovery, cultural resource monitoring during construction are required, the cost of those archaeological investigations are the responsibility of the applicant. And important to note that all cultural resources work done in MnDOT right-of-way has to conform to MnDOT CRU standards. So the end result, if a permit does get routed for CRU review, will be a findings letter if there is consultation that's initiated with consulting parties, and it may come with some conditions, and a few examples are listed below. So a discovery plan may be required, archaeological monitoring during project construction may be a condition of the issuance of that permit, other specific conditions by location, but associated with all permits that are routed to CRU review, there are some conditions placed on all of those permits that cross CRU's desk. So there's always a chance of encountering archaeological sites or human remains on a project. So these are conditions that apply to, again, to all permits that are reviewed by MnDOT CRUs. So in the event archaeological deposits, including but not limited to human remains or other indications of burials, are discovered, the applicant has to cease all activity in and near the area of discovery and follow the steps below. So flag off the area, use flagging tape to block off the area of discovery, or other appropriate means of securing the area. Immediately notify local law enforcement and authorities and MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit of the discovery if human remains or suspected human remains are discovered, and keep all personnel out of the area of the discovery until directed by MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit. So by pulling MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit into that conversation, CRU is able to reach out to those necessary regulators to determine what the next steps need to be in those particular instances. So I'm going to present here kind of the main takeaways from MnDOT CRU as a land owning entity who is obligated to meet its state statute obligations. So just a few, I suppose, main points and some things that I've been seeing recently in permit applications and might be helpful to go over. So MnDOT's role associated with proposed projects by utilities in MnDOT right-of-way is limited to the review of associated permit applications for work in MnDOT-controlled lands pursuant to applicable state statute obligations. So MnDOT CRU can only review what it is responsible for under state statute. So an example of this might be proposed service connections on lands outside of MnDOT's control. So those private service connections on private property, those areas are outside of MnDOT CRU's review responsibilities, and ensuring that state statute is met in those cases would be the responsibility of the permit applicant. Multiple regulators review under multiple cultural resource statutes. So the State Historic Preservation Office, the Office of State Archaeologists, and the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council may have different recommendations depending on their reviews per their review responsibilities. Following up with these agencies as their responses are received as part of that environmental review process, and reaching a consensus is going to greatly assist MnDOT CRU's review by the time that project gets to the permitting stage. If you have a cultural resource consultant conduct work for you, carefully reading your consultant's cultural resource reports prepared for your projects. So their recommendations, proposed findings, etc. All of those are predicated on what they did or did not review. So generally speaking, cultural resource consultants are not clearing the entire right-of-way, and their recommendations are based on a certain distance from center line, within areas of previous demonstrated disturbance, etc. If you don't understand your consultant's recommendations, meet with your consultant. It's recommended to retain your consultant to assist with the consideration of those agency recommendations in relation to those state statute obligations as those responses are received during that environmental review process, to determine if additional work is necessary, as originally stated in reports, and to determine if recommendations are feasible, and if not, and even if they are, to assist with continued conversations with those review agencies, with those regulators through the permitting phase. And an additional note that MnDOT Cultural Resources Unit may or may not concur with those recommendations from consultants based on its review under state statute. So the final point that I think I've reiterated a few times now is that MnDOT's role associated with proposed permits by utilities and MnDOT right-of-way is limited to review of permit applications for work in MnDOT-controlled lands pursuant to applicable state statute obligations. That's the end.
That was so helpful. Thank you so much, Anne and Jamie. Like the slide says, we're now opening it up for questions. You should have the ability to unmute and use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question. I can also help monitor the chat if you want to put your questions in there. So turn it over for questions if anyone has any.
Well, Jamie, I think we must have done really well. Nobody has a
Everything
question
was
for us.
crystal clear. I'm so glad. Awesome.
I do have a question. I'm Linda Haken, and I was wondering if you have any kind of a Google KMZ showing the findings of previous archaeological or other agencies in the areas that we may go or may not go on a statewide basis.
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit, Linda. So archaeological site locational data are a protected data type per federal and state regulations. So those data aren't publicly accessible, unfortunately. But the Office of the State Archaeologist portal, which maintains all of the state archaeological data, does have an interactive public mapping, and it's somewhat generalized. I believe it presents data at the section level, but it does show the number of previously recorded sites kind of in that PLS section level throughout the state, as well as I know that for planners and other individuals who need maybe a little bit more detailed information, but are cultural resource specialists, they can apply to the OSA again for that portal feature to have sort of an intermediate layer called the planner level data, and hopefully OSA will be able to talk more about that in their presentation in a few weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question for Jamie. Thank you for the presentation. Very good data. It looks like most of the statutes, nothing's really changed statute-wise in the state from MnDOT's perspective, but it does feel like things are different now than they have been in the past. The processes in MnDOT and the focus on environmental now, is that accurate? That things are different now, but the laws or statutes really haven't changed?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that, Jason. So I'm a newer introduction here into MnDOT. I've been here about 8 months, but I'm currently the permit lead reviewer. And as I understand, MnDOT internally, as of 2019, started reviewing more with the OES unit and specifically with cultural resources as permit applications came in for trunk highways and other permit application types. So you're right that there has been a few updates to state statute, even in the last legislative session, that have had some pretty big implications for Minnesota. But essentially, sort of the nuts and bolts pieces have remained the same for a bit now.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll kind of move into closing out the session today. Thank you again so much, Anne and Jamie, for kicking off the series. In the chat, I'm going to go ahead and post the registration links for future sessions. For next week, we will be hearing from the State Historical Preservation Office, which will provide the perspective of how SHPO reviews state-funded border-to-border projects under current state laws, and that session will be the same time, different Teams link. Again, that registration is in the chat, and again, everything will be recorded and posted to the website later as well from all these different sessions. So if anyone has any questions after this, please do reach out. Thank you again so much for your time and participation, particularly to our presenters today. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon. If you're in the metro, that involves a charming combination of sleet and snow, but otherwise closing out for today, and just thank you again to everyone.
Thank you.